And I remember specifically how I knew that you were good working with actors, because we were shooting a scene. It was in a bedroom, and it was like several takes, and it was kind of going along. And I remember you keyed in on a very specific thing, that was, you felt that the actress was, her chest was really tight, right? And it was like a very specific thing that you keyed in on. You're like, I feel like you're very bound up, and I need you to take a breath, and I need you to relax, and I need you to kind of let it go.
Yeah.
And I just remember that was like a very specific note that you wouldn't generally get.
So that actually brings me to an interesting point I always like to ask everybody. So sometimes making a movie, you're going to deal with people, cast and crew, who might be difficult, provide some challenges. I mean, what's your technique? How do you handle those people? What do you do? Like, if there's someone that just is not working with you, they're arguing, you feel like they're challenging you, that maybe they don't respect you. To them, it's just, you thought they were on board, but it seems like it's just a paycheck after like a couple of days into the shoot.
Right.
What's your process? Because you can either fire them, but if you don't have someone second up on the roster, you're going to be kind of screwed. I mean, what do you do? How do you handle that stuff?
I mean, great question. I would say I have been fortunate enough where I have never run into that scenario where it was a person that I could not afford to lose. Right. So I've had to fire people before. I've definitely had people come on board that I'm like, this guy is not my kind of guy, like, like that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And I've had to let him go. Fortunately, it's been, up until this point, it's been people that were not super important, and we're able to kind of walk away from without causing any issues.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to say. I mean, I know that is a huge fear of mine, of getting into that exact scenario where it's somebody like the lead in your production, or someone thereabouts, or a central crew member where you can't really do without them.
Yeah.
And so I try to, I try to combat that with just having as many conversations and dialogue with that person as possible before we get to that point, right? And I think everyone says this, but I feel like I'm a pretty good judge of character in general. And so I try to listen to that instinct. And if it's someone that I'm not particularly, that I have worries about, then then I don't go that route. Now, sometimes my instinct's wrong, like I've certainly run into scenarios where I've been 100% on someone, and then it's like, oh shit, I read that one wrong. Fortunately, I don't know. It's a tough call. There's no great way to deal with it. But it's going to happen. It's just a matter of how important it is. I mean, I think a lot of times, if you're stuck in a situation where you sort of have to tolerate it, I consider myself to be a pretty good peacemaker, right? So all of those years as an IT person in like tech support and dealing with customers and things like that,
Right.
I've spent a lot of years doing that, dealing with people that I didn't want to talk to. And so I feel like I've gotten to a point now where I can talk people through, at least to get where I need to be, in a way that works. And so, I mean, sometimes it comes down to it's a judgment call. I mean, I know I've had a situation where there was a crew member who was somewhat essential to the production, and it got to a point where I had to let him go.
Yeah.
And hire somebody else, which then ended up meaning it cost me a lot more money to do it, right? And so there was just that, you come to that breaking point where it's like, okay, I can just let it go and do it this way and keep this person on. Um, but I know it's going to be an inferior product.
Yeah.
Or I let them go, hire someone else, and then now I got to come up with X amount of dollars more, or it's going to cost this amount of time to redo. Um, and then it just you just gotta you gotta weigh the pros and cons, and you pick your lesser of two evils and you go with it. I the last time I ended up spending the money and just being like, you know what, if I just go with this and I don't say anything, I'm not going to be happy with the result. It's gonna be something that's gonna nag with me forever.
Yeah.
And the good bad thing about film is it only exists in one moment in time, at least the filmmaking process.
Yeah.
So you only get one shot, ideally. You only get one shot to do it. And once it's over, it's over.
Yeah.
And so there's no redos. And so you might as well, if you have the ability to redo something, and you're better off doing that if you're uncomfortable with it, because you don't want to get into a situation where year, 2 years, 3 years, 5, 10, 12, 15 years down the road, you look back on and you're like, god damn it, I should have went the other way, and I didn't. So it's hard. It's really hard, because it's a type of industry that is unlike other ones, where you're bringing all of these people together, some of which you don't know very well, into a pressure cooker of a situation for a very short period of time, with a very high risk, high reward scenario.
Yeah.
And so you just kind of, you got to try and trust your instinct. You got to be a bit of, at least I believe anyway, I'm not the type of director. I don't understand how anyone can be the director where it's just like, my way or the highway, get the fuck off my set. Like, unless they do something crazy. Like, I don't understand in this day and age how you can be like that. You have to be a bit of a peacemaker. You have to be like, all right, well, let's let's kind of get this thing going in a way, in a direction that is at least productive, and then I'll figure out how I can fix it later on.
Yeah.
Because I just think like the old school directors is like old school baseball managers. I know you're not a baseball guy, but back in the early days of baseball, you had baseball managers who were tyrants, right? It was, you will do everything I say when I say it, and if you do not, I will sit you and I will make you do all sorts of stuff that you will not like.
Yeah.
But now, with contracts and money and everything going on, like, you can't be that kind of a baseball manager. It's just not possible. It's just, so now you've got to be a bit more of a personnel guy, where you have to be able to negotiate and talk with your players and talk with the owners and figure out ways to mediate problems before they arise, or at least mediate problems after they arise, so that everyone kind of comes out of it okay. And I think it's just the same way in film. I think you just kind of have to. It's too hard of a situation. Maybe if I had a $200 million budget and I had an unlimited amount of time or energy to spend on something, you could be a little bit more hard nosed, but I just don't think you can do it.
I think there's always a balance. I mean, look at all the stuff that's going on with Joss Whedon, the former, like prince of filmmaking, for, as far as Buffy and the Avengers movies, and he has a bad experience with Justice League, and then all this stuff starts coming out about him, allegedly, that he's this and that and whatever, but it's kind of crazy. And then you have the flip side of that, though. There was that story about Frank Oz. He was making, I think, Brando's last movie, that De Niro and what's his name, Ed Norton, were in. And Marlon Brando didn't like him. He kept calling him Miss Piggy, which is just so fucking insulting.
Yeah.
He didn't even call him Yoda. He called him Miss Piggy. It's like, dude, what a jackass! And he's calling him Miss Piggy, and Frank Oz supposedly took it and never, because it was Marlon Brando and he wanted to get his movie made. And then the movie, supposedly, I don't remember what movie it was. It wasn't good, from what I heard.
Oh man, I know the movie you're talking. It was like The Thief, or
The Heist.
The Heist. I think it was The
Okay.
Heist.
I don't know where that just came from.
Yeah, maybe it
Oh,
was called
crap.
I can't. It might have been The Heist, but it doesn't really matter. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I derailed your thought. Go ahead.
No, and so there's like the story goes that Brando Frank Oz comes in to direct the scene, and Brando's like, get out of here. I don't want you, Mr. Tiggy, directing me. And De Niro's sitting there with him, and he goes, I'm kicking you off the set. And Frank Oz left the set.
Mm-hmm.
And then Brando did the scene with De Niro, and I was just like, how do you then show up the next day as the director and show your face? Like my personality doesn't allow for that. I don't care who Brando was, I probably would have like grabbed a pin and tried to pop him at that point, But I just think that there's such a fine balance. I think I agree with you though. I think communicator, like being able to communicate, and I've said this to you. This is another thing, and I've said it to a lot of other people. There was this moment with Clandestine where I said, "All right, you're like, what do you want this room to look like?" And it was that first scene in the police station
Mm-hmm.
when McEnroe, the DEA agent, is talking to Coop, and we find out the DEA's been in the town for like whatever, and the lieutenant's there, and they have this conversation.
Sure.
And I said, "Did you remember in the '80s on Saturdays there was that Reagan commercial? It's morning again in America. You remember that feeling? You'd be sitting there eating your bowl of cereal, and that commercial would come on, and it was coming on before the Smurfs or whatever. You remember how that made you feel?" And you were like, "Yeah, I actually think I do." I'm like, "Can you make the room look like that?" And you were like, "I know I usually say like 10 minutes. You got to give me like a half an hour on this one." And I was like, "All right." And you literally ran off with your camera and you closed the door. Everyone's like, "Well, where's Brad?" I said, "I don't know, but I think he's doing something amazing, And then you come over to me and you're like, all right, what do you think? What do you think?" And I was like, "Holy shit, that's exactly what was in my head."
Mm-hmm.
And there was that ability to communicate and you understanding it just from internalizing that, and that's like such a huge part, I think, of directing is assembling the people that you, and we didn't really know each other at that point. I think that was, I don't know, maybe the fifth shoot, fourth or fifth day of shooting or something, But I remember that moment. You had that moment about me directing, and I had that moment where I was like, "Oh, this dude's gonna kill this shit. Like, this is gonna be them. This is gonna look awesome," and it did. Every time, I was like, I have to communicate what's in this head to him in a way that he gets it. And there were a couple of times where you were just like, "I'm not following you." Like, what do you mean, or what are you looking for? And then I would find another way of explaining it, and then you would do it. But I think it's just directing is such an interesting experience. It's one of the most rewarding ones I've had, as a person, working with so many different people and getting so many different types of people together to work on something. And trying to make it fun and positive and constructive, where at the end of the day, people have a nice sense of pride in what they worked on, and I know you go for the same thing with your films, because a lot of the folks that you work with, I believe you continue to work with them, or you get them back to try to do another role or be in it again or something like that.
Yeah, I try. I try to get it. Just like anything else. You kind of the people that you enjoy working with, you try to carry along with you.
Yeah.
And then you bring in. You always want to sort of expand your sphere of influence, right? So you always want to get your world a little bit larger.
Mhm.
And you sort of pick up people along the way, and you're just like,
Yeah.
oh, like I like this person, I'll use them again, or no, I don't like this person, I'm not going to ask them back. I think that's just sort of the nature of the business, is you try to roll through and you pick up people as you go, and you want to work with people that you like. You don't want to. There's no point in working with people you don't.
Yeah.
I don't care. I don't care how talented you are. If I don't like working with you, it's not going to make it. It's not going to make it worth it. It's not going to make it worth it for me.
Yeah.
I'd rather have somebody who may not be quite as talented, but will give me 100%, than someone who is like super talented, but then you got to pull teeth to get it out of them. That's just, that's just my own thing, but other people have, different philosophies on that.
Yeah.
And so, but I mean, directing, I feel like directing, and I'm curious what you think about this. So one of the weird things about directing is and this is something I wrestle with all the time. So you you get a scene, the actors do their thing, they do the scene, and then it's like you have this in your head. For me, I have like in my head, okay, well, I don't like this, I don't like that, this is good, or whatever. It's that idea of kind of going back to communication, of being able to sort of let them know what it is that you like and don't like, so that you can get a different performance without, by sort of like, you kind of like circle the drain a little bit. Like, you can't just say like, oh, do it this way, because
Yeah.
that's not going to get you anywhere,
Yeah.
right? So it's this sort of trying to get information to them so that you can convey this, what you're thinking of how it should be done, without explaining it, without just like, here's a recording of what I want to hear, because that's just terrible.
Right.
So I know for me, I always think, every time I give a line, every time I give a direction to an actor, I always think it's the worst direction I could possibly give. I always walk away from it and I'm like, well, that was terrible.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way anything is going to come out of that. That's awful. And then 9 times out of 10, they do something that is what I want, and I'm like,
Right.
oh, great, that worked. But like, I don't know, like, it's one of the most, I find, and I'm curious what you think about. It's one of the most difficult aspects of it, is being able to get an actor, or not to say to get them, but in order to work with an actor to get the performance that you're looking for, in a way that's constructive. Like, I've certainly worked with directors that, and I'm sure as an actor you have as well, where they'll speak for 20 minutes to an actor and there are no usable words in those 20 minutes at all, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of like, well, we just want to get the essence of this, and it should be, the world. Like, it's like this really like sweet kind of, I don't know, this sort of amorphous kind of language that doesn't really have any real world applications to it.
Yeah.
And like, I know, as a DP, I've heard that, and I'm just like, if I was that actor, I would have no idea what
I'd
the
be
hell.
jumping out the window out of terror.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, is that something that you kind of struggle with, or is that something that you find is very easy, or how do you deal with that?
I that's where I think what you said before about coming from the actor perspective,
Mm,
that big environmental conversation, the whole seed of this is what your character is going through. That's in rehearsal. That's
right.
psychology time. That's where you're psychologically trying to understand your character. At least that's the method that I always approached acting with. And I've noticed when I haven't done that, I didn't give a good performance. So there's a
Mm,
place for that, but not on the set,
mm,
and not when everyone else is sitting around waiting. The actor should be there at that point, and I'll overload. I mean, we did that when we did rehearsals, for all of the projects we've done, but really for Clandestine, because I knew that was going to be, I was going to be asking all of these actors to go much deeper than I'd seen them go.
mm,
Um, I wanted to load them up with the psychology of this universe. What's going on for your character, and having a psychology background. I love that shit. So I loved it as an actor, and I love doing it as a director. Like we said, I like movies where I feel like you're entering into the environment. Um, you know, so I want to fill people up with that. Even if they don't use it, I want them to understand how I'm approaching it.
mm,
Um, and then when it's time to film, I realized there may need be a little bit of a need for a little bit of coaching, a little conversation, a little reminder, or sometimes, with Clandestine again, we had a scene where um, an actress was supposed to be having a panic attack. I knew she could do it without
mm,
a doubt. But it wasn't happening in that moment. And I knew I needed it because as the editor, I'm looking at her journey and I'm like, if this switch doesn't happen here, what she decides to do doesn't work for the rest of the movie. And you completely delegitimize the reality you're trying to create. and the stakes for this character. So I remember I shut the doors. It was in the summer, and I said, "I want you to stay in the car and sweat, and then breathe really, really heavy." And I just had her key, and I said to you, "We're not even going to slate. We're just going to go. I just want to get it." And you were like, "Are you like did it, you're looking at me like I was maybe insane, but you were willing to give it a shot, you know?" And I said to her, I was talking to her, and I was talking her through it. And I was like, keep breathing, breathe faster, 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 faster. No, don't take a breath. I didn't say you could take a breath. Breathe, breathe, breathe. And then I saw it, and she was sweating, and I was like, all right, let's go. And then we hit it, and she fucking destroyed it. And I thought she did a great job.
Yeah.
So I think, that's another thing, knowing that your actors can get there, and then knowing not mind fucking them, because I know there's directors that do that. And I think I had a Meisner teacher do that in a Meisner class I took. He knew that this woman was a battered wife and she was divorced.
Yeah.
And I'm doing a scene with her, and he's feeding me the lines to give her in this acting class. And, I was younger. I was not nearly as observant. And, but this fed into my directing technique. And he was like, "Tell her she's a piece of shit." And I was like, "Yeah, a piece of shit. Tell her she's not worth anything. You're not fucking worth anything, you fucking dog." And I started throwing in my own stuff. Woo, she fucking exploded from the table and rushed after me. And I had taken karate for like 2 months when I was 20. And the guy who was a former guardian angel said to us, "Listen, at some point in time, you might have to use this. All right, it will come back to you. Trust me." And I was like, "This guy's full of shit." I swear to God, she came at me. I blocked her punch, and I had her up against the wall in like a non uh, dangerous hold with my forearm. And the whole class went, "Oh!" And the teacher got up and ran over. And I was just saying to her, I'm not going to use, I just remembered her name, but I was like, "Just calm down, calm down." But he had made her snap
Yeah.
because she had confided in him in the interview to get into the class all this stuff about her husband and what she was going through. And I found out about it later, and I was so pissed at the teacher,
Mm.
that somebody would betray. I'm like, "You're not. Is there another way that maybe you could have gotten a response from her that was genuine? Did you need to damage her psychologically in that way?"
Right.
And it just pissed me off. And it was something that I've always kept in mind. So whether it was that actress, um, in that scene, or it was, other actors we've worked with or dealt with, I just always said, like, I'm never going to pull that trigger. That trigger's not right. And I also know that physically, if you make somebody within reason uncomfortable, like in a hot car, and they're okay to be in it,
Right.
and make them breathe heavily, your mind's going to start to follow what your body's doing.
Sure.
So it's a very long answer to your question. I apologize, but
No, no, it's all good. It's all good. It's something that I find very interesting, just because it's that it's that part of directing that there's no one way to define it, right? There's no one way to do it, much like everything else, this stupid business.
yeah,
But like, it's like, I know what I want, and it's like, what can I say to you so that you can get there for me?
yeah,
um and it's got to be organic, otherwise it's not going to work.
yeah,
And so it's always that, to me, that's always the game of, all right, let's see. And like, I have some things in my head, I'm going to say them, and let's see if it works, and I always walk away from after every take, and I give notes, I walk away, I'm like, well, that's probably not going to do anything.
well,
And
i
then
i think you're selling yourself short, because seeing the performances in your movies, your actors get it. And they don't give bad performances, in the flicks that you've done that I've seen, and I've seen them all. So so you're definitely conveying, I think, the right thing to them. And it's comfort. I think it's comfort. Like, as an actor, I've done stuff where the director, I just didn't feel comfortable with him.
mm,
And I looked at the performance, and I'm like, God, I hope they don't finish it, because I just didn't feel, I didn't like what I did. Now, maybe I'm being too critical of myself, but I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel like I was getting that guidance. And then,
Right.
but then there's the flip side. You know, when we worked with Sizemore, um, Tom Sizemore, he had said something I thought was interesting. He was talking about working on Black Hawk Down. Talk about an ensemble movie. I mean, with
Right.
just a buttload of characters. And you know, I really like Ridley Scott, and I was like, what is he? How's his directing? How does he? I was interested as a director and an actor, and he was like, he trusts you. He hired you because he knows you can play a role.
Sure.
And he's like, the direction, we did this one scene, and you know, trucks are exploding and a guy's laying on the ground with his guts hanging out, which was such a disgusting moment of that movie. You're smiling, I think you enjoyed that scene. but um but no, but it was such a moment of just shock, and they filmed it like it was shock, and his character walks up completely, I believe, if I'm remembering it, like unfazed. And Ridley Scott didn't like what he was doing. And he said Ridley Scott was in like a tent in another building because there was so much shit exploding. He wasn't going to be, it's not like Michael Baying it where he's like right there.
Right.
Um, you know, bigger, bigger. But he said like he would just hear, and then you would hear like, oh, no, direct, you know, Ridley's coming out. And then he's like, you'd have to wait for him, and he would come out, and he would, you know, you had to stay in your position. And then he squatted down next to me and said to me, you know, I hired you because I know what you can do. Can you do better? I know you can do better. So let's do better. And then Sizemore was like, okay, I got to do better. And then he did it, you know, and he was awesome in that movie in
Yeah.
Black Hawk Down. But, you know, so that's another technique where he's not, I couldn't direct like that. I
Hmm.
might from time to time. Um, but, you know, I don't know. It's such a balancing act of knowing when to say too much. I mean, and I'll out it because we're filming a scene with Janine, my wife, for Clandestine, and she had to be upset at the end of the movie as she's punching in the character that died,
Right.
and I'm talking her through. I was like, now you know, you're feeling sad. You're feeling there's, you know, now a little bit more, a little bit. It's making you think of someone you lost. And she's like, could you stop? You know, and I have it on the footage. And she was like, you know, you're throwing me off, you know, and I was doing too much. You know, I was over directing. And you're going to do that too. You're going to fuck up sometimes. You know, and it really depends on, and you know, there might be other people that I've directed and they've wanted to say the same thing, but you know, they weren't my wife, so they didn't feel comfortable saying to me, you know, get out of my hair. It's a little too much. So I don't know. It's such a balancing act.
It's
Um,
always, it's without a doubt the one thing that like, you know, when you see like, I don't get too involved in like interviews of people like filmmakers and stuff. Like, I mean, some of it has its place, and
mhm,
it's fine to watch some of the stuff like interviews with directors and actors and stuff like that. Like, it's fine, but I'm not a person who really dives into and like watches interviews with all these different people.
yeah.
But the one thing I do find very fascinating, and I'm always interested on, is hearing what directors tell actors on set. So whenever there's like an actor who will talk about their experience with a specific director and how that director communicates to them, that's where sort of my ears perk up. And I'm like, oh, I'm
Mhm,
very interested to hear like what that experience is, because
mhm,
it changes so much from person to person. And, you know, all I'm left with is sort of the end result. And I'm curious, like, you know, how, because you do find that directors tend to have very similar styles from movie to movie, unless you're something like Joel Schumacher, who's all over the goddamn place. But like most directors have like very similar styles that you can kind of chart from their throughout their whole career. And
yeah.
so you feel like, well, they work with different people all the time.
Mhm,
So there's gotta be something that they're doing that is eliciting this kind of response. And so I'm
yeah.
always very fascinated by that. And I remember hearing a story, it might have been for Dark Knight Rises. It was one of the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. I don't remember what. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But like Gary Oldman was giving a performance, and this is, I think, an interview with Gary Oldman, and he was giving a performance where he's doing this whole thing, and he was talking about Nolan's directing style, and he was saying there's one scene where Gary Oldman has like this whole speech, and he gives this whole speech, Nolan yells cut, and then walks over to him, and the only thing he says to him, he just quietly says, "The stakes are a little higher than that."
Mm,
And that was it. And then he walked away. they did the scene and it was what, it was great. But like, that's a sort of thing where I was like very fascinated by that, where it was like, oh, he didn't get into this like giant, well, I'm going to talk for 20 minutes about all this other stuff. It was this very succinct point, which you can immediately understand what he's looking for, right? The stakes are higher than that. And so without using all these extra words, he was able to pinpoint and get and elicit a very specific sort of reaction. And so like, that's the stuff I always find very interesting to hear, is things like that.
And I that would be something for me as an actor that I would, okay, got it. And but you've done your homework, and you know what for me, I would know what the psychology of my character was and how I fit into the overall story, and where's the film at this point, and what's it trying to grow to, and where's it going. And so something saying like that would make sense to me. But then, there's other actors too. You get, because there's so many different personalities. I've also heard interviews where actors were like, nothing's worse than a director that doesn't tell you enough. Sure. And then I hear, nothing's worse than a director who, gives you a line read and tells you too much.
Right.
So you ultimately got to feel, I think, confident and comfortable in who you are, which I know you do, and I do myself, in what you're trying to get out there, what you're trying to convey. And then I think you just have to go with it, and if someone has a problem with you because of that, well, we'll talk about it afterwards. And I think the other thing too, you don't want to get into a big, long, huge conversation about it, because that's time. 20-minute conversation, if an actor comes in and everything hits right, you could film maybe a whole page of dialogue in that 20 minutes that you now lost because you had to go through this whole big, long discussion with somebody. So,
yeah. And I think, I think for me specifically, one of the things, and I've certainly had, I certainly had actors ask me about, so auditions, right? Auditions, like, nobody likes auditions. It's terrible for everybody.
They suck. They're awful. Yeah.
Right. And so I've had a lot of actors ask me what I look for in auditions. And one of the things that I've learned over the years, my number one thing that I look for is an actor that can take a note. Right. So kind of getting back to what I mentioned before, like, you might be super talented. You might be able to come in and nail it on the first shot. But if I give you a note and you can't internalize it and you can't give me a different performance, then I can't use you. Yeah. Because then that means that you have to be on 100% of the time. And if you're not, we can't get there together. Yeah. And that to me scares me, because it's like, well, shit, what happens if, it's 4 a.m. and we've got this scene to do, and like, you can't get there and you can only deliver one performance. Like, that's not going to work for me. And so for me, the biggest thing in the audition process is like, someone will give me a read, and then I'll give them, even if they came in and nailed it and it was like, that's exactly what I imagined when I wrote it. It's exactly what I imagined in my head. I've never thought anything else differently. That was 100% perfect. I will then give them a note that is completely different, because I just want to see if you can then take that note, internalize it, and give me something different. Then it's like, okay, now I know that I can work with you. Now I know that whatever the words that come out of my mouth, you are able to then take and do something with. Yeah. There are many times, and I'm sure you've run into this before, that I've been in an audition and I give a note and it's the same performance. All right, well, now let's do it kind of this way. Imagine, like, I feel like your character is maybe a bit more agitated or whatever, whatever the hell I said. Yeah. And it's the same performance. And like, well, let's try it. It's like, what if she was a bit more desperate? Same performance, and it's like, all right, well then this isn't going to help me. Like, I don't care how good you are. This isn't going to help me. Yeah. So I think part of that starts with the audition process and the casting. Now, of course, where we are right now, we are not high enough where we can audition some of the higher level actors before we cast them. We just have to roll the dice and be like, well, let's hope this guy isn't a total douchebag, because I can't afford to, I don't have a high enough reputation to be able to ask him to submit a reel or a tape. Yeah. So I have to just cast him and hope that he's good or she's good. Yeah. But it's definitely something that I've found over the years.
Yeah, I think it is. There's certain elements of filmmaking that are very 2 + 2 = 4 for me
Right.
at this stage in the game. And at this point now, I mean, I've been involved in it some form or another since '95, so it's going on a while now, which
Yeah.
is fucking crazy. But
Don't try and think of it too much.
no, I'm
Don't
not.
try
I
and do
gotta
the math.
move.
Just do
Move away from that and
it.
think about happy, pleasant fields with flowers and things. But no, but there are other elements to it that are almost, I want to say mystical, but they're not concrete. They're very nebulous. You know, they're very. It's that creative thing. Where does that creative idea come from? Where does this idea for Cryptid come from? Where does Jacob Marr come from? I don't know. It just came. You know, it's. It reminds me of that thing Marvin Gaye when he was writing "What's Going On." He had
Mhm.
somebody, he shared it with somebody, and they said, you know, Marvin, this is crazy. Like, where's this coming from? He goes, that's not coming from me. It's coming from God. You know,
Mhm.
that's what he felt. You know, he's like, I don't know where it's coming from, but these words and this message is not mine. And I'm not saying that so much with what we're doing, but there are those moments where you don't know. You can't pin it down. It's not science.
Yeah.
It's not something that makes sense. It's that creative energy. It's an energy, and sometimes your energy clicks, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes your energy allows you to give a performance, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it allows you to communicate something um, effectively, and sometimes it doesn't. There's so many different components to it all that I think it's kind of amazing we are able to make movies and then hold a DVD. I still like to hold a DVD in my hand when it's done, and say like, "Wow, this is mine." This I made this with all of these other people. We all put this energy into it. Even people you may not have gotten along with. At the end of the day, I look at that and I'm proud of everybody. That all these people came together to make this thing happen. It's I think it's beautiful. I'm never going to have kids, so for me, that's my
Right.
those are like my children. When you see those those moments, you're proud of it. Oh, I graduated and didn't fuck up the car. It didn't crash the car at any point during its teenage years. That's extraordinary. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. It's I don't know. And I think, and if you meet people along the way that you really like, that you like to collaborate, like, obviously we do,
Mhm.
then that's just an extra bonus. I consider myself very lucky when I look at the awesome people in my life in film that I also consider friends. And we all share the blood, sweat, and tears of like getting a project, wanting to make a project, getting a project made, talking about a project, and then ideally one day being able to actually film it. But it's interesting. It's a very interesting field we've chosen.
Well, I mean, it's in a, and I don't mean to marginalize this, but it's like a sense of going through war, with
Hmm.
the projects,
Yeah.
where uh, where like I mentioned before, it's this very specific point in time where you're bringing all these people together for this very short window, and then you're creating something that is never going to be reproduced, right?
Yeah.
It's everyone is here, we're all on board to do this one thing, then we go our separate ways, and like, yeah, well, some of us will come back together and do a different project, but that's going to have a different feel to it, a
Hmm.
different energy,
Yeah.
a different everything. It's not going to be the same thing. So it's this very unique experience, and you really do sort of create these relationships because it's this very intense scenario where all too well that sometimes you're on a hour number 16 and it's 4 in the morning
Yeah.
and you're struggling to try and get a scene done before the sun comes up so you can get out of there. And like, it's sort of like being in a sort of warlike scenario where you kind of you make sort of these relationships for that bond for a while,
Yeah.
for where it's just like, I don't know, it just makes these connections and stuff that
Yeah.
that is tough to that I know personally I don't really get in the same way as any other job. Like I've certainly worked enough office jobs in my life, and I have people that I've met in office jobs that are friends or whatever, and have become friends.
Yeah.
But it's a different experience, you know. It's a different thing where, you know, if it's just some person I worked in an office with for a couple months, especially if it's like a couple months, if I've worked at a job for a few months and I walk away, I'll probably never think about that person in my life.
Yeah.
But if I'm 3 weeks on a set with a person, I will remember that person forever. You
Yeah.
know, it's a very intense sort of scenario, and it creates this very lasting imprint.
It does. It does. I agree with you. I mean, I've only really had those experiences in doing something creative, whether it was a theater show where we all suffered, or it was, you know, a film
It's always
shoot.
suffering. It's always suffering.
Really suffering. You know, and but there is a bond. I mean, I did one show where it was ended up being a great show. It was the Fantastics, and I did it for a community theater back in like '99. It was a long time ago, and uh, we had a guy drop out. We barely had any rehearsals. The director stepped in and ended up playing the role of my father in it. And he used to blank out and forget his lines. So I had all his shit memorized, which I tended to do anyway. So I could just get us out of the scene and still get the story. So I was like improvising. The show ended up, I think the show one time was like a half an hour shorter than it was supposed to be. So anytime I had a scene with him and he fucked up, I literally just was like, okay, and and all right, and we're done with the scene. Oh, we skipped that song. That's too bad. Let's go. You know, and we all said to each other, God, we all fucking love each other so much. You realize that none of us are going to talk after this, but we're always going to have a bond. And it was none of us, and none of us ever did. None of us ever talked again or worked together again because it was such a horrible experience. But I still remember those people so fondly, and it was 22 years ago, you know. But there is, though, and I know, like, even now, assembling the next crew for the next movie, I'm going and I'm reaching out to people who were on Clandestine or were on a previous films, and I'm saying to them, hey, you know, would you like to come back and play this part again, or, you know, be involved with this or that? You know, some of them are like, oh, I'm not doing it anymore. And there's like, oh, that sucks. You know, it sucks you're not acting or doing this or that in crew. But anyway, but we have gone over, my friend. Usually I keep these to about an hour, so this is going to be a two-parter.
Oh boy. I had a feeling that was going to happen because I feel like we're both kind of chatty Cathys.
Yeah. Well, usually when we get on the phone, it's like, geez, man, I just called to ask Brad one thing, and it's 4 hours later. Oh well.
That was like I remember when we first had our phone calls for Clandestine, where it was like a series of like 4-hour phone calls.
Yeah.
Where it was just like, oh, let's just chat for a little bit, and the next thing you know, like 4 hours would go by.
Yeah.
We're talking about literally every movie that ever existed.
Yep.
So I had a feeling that was going to happen tonight.
Yeah.
Either that or you have to edit some stuff. Either way.
I think I'm probably just gonna. I don't think I'm going to edit much out, to be honest with you. So, but I want to thank you for hopping on. This was awesome. Like I said, any stuff you want to share with Cryptid, I'm going to more than happy to put it in, to the video and provide links and all those other awesome fun things so people can start checking it out ahead of time, or awesome. Jacob Marr or anything else you've done. So, but yeah, man, thank you again for coming on, and I'll be chatting to you real soon. Actually, I'll be chatting with you as soon as I stop pressing record. So, but awesome. I will.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
It was my pleasure. I was looking forward to it.
All right, cool.
All right, man. I'll talk to you.